You're listening to the VSL Aviation Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Lake. Welcome back. Thanks for listening. In today's episode, we're doing another round of Checkride Insights, this time with my guest and good friend, Jeremy Lashbrook. Jeremy's a highly experienced pilot, instructor, and DPE based in Central Arkansas. He's a retired U.S. Army aviator with over 26 years of service, flying both rotor-wing and fixed-wing aircraft. He now serves as an EMS helicopter pilot in Little Rock and as a Part 135 check airman for a regional helicopter operator. He's also an active FAA safety team representative. Jeremy holds an ATP with type ratings in the Gulfstream II, Fairchild Metroliner, Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk, the King Air 300-350, the Douglas DC-3, and experimental authorizations in several warbirds, including the Yak-3, 9, and 11, the B-24 Liberator, and the B-29 Superfortress. He's a CFI for airplanes, single and multi, rotorcraft instrument instructor, and also holds an AMP certificate. Needless to say, Jeremy brings a wealth of experience to the table, and I'm excited to have him on the show. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Stay tuned. Well, Jeremy, thanks you so much for joining us here on the podcast. Look forward to talking to you and learning about how you give check rides, and not just how you give check rides, but maybe some of the things that you're seeing day to day. You've been giving check rides, I think, the same amount of time as I have. So you've gotten a lot of iterations, and you've seen a lot of good, bad, and ugly out there with applicants and CFIs and all that. So yeah, I'm just going to give you the floor. You can talk about whatever you'd like to when it comes to check rides.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. Thanks for having me. I really always enjoy the products you put out. And yeah, you're right. So I started as a DP probably about 6 months or so after you. So I think you and I have communicated a lot over the years and shared a lot of experiences. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to do this. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've already kind of gone around the Arkansas DPEs, and I think you'll be the fourth episode here. But I'm just amazed and privileged to be a coworker or counterpart of you guys, because y'all are just so experienced, and you bring a lot of depth of experience and breadth of experience. You're the first one that I've interviewed that also is a kind of multi-role. You do rotor as well as fixed wing. So interested to hear kind of your take on that, because we don't talk a lot about a lot of rotor stuff on my channel here, because I'm not a rotor guy. But anyway, what we've been doing is other examiners kind of start from the admin aspect, and then they go through the oral and then the flight. So that's kind of a logical way to go through it. So on the admin side, are you seeing any trends recently about people being prepared for the check ride from an administrative standpoint?
Yeah, a little bit. I see a lot of logbooks not totaled up. Just like most examiners, I have a website, and when someone communicates with me, and we normally set a date, and sometimes that's text, sometimes that's phone call, sometimes that's email. I'm happy communicating with any process. And then once we set a date, I'll send the person to my website. My website has a couple of forms they can fill out, upload a couple things, and then I also have a kind of what to bring and how to prepare. And one of the things I'm big on, and I'm sure we all are, is making sure that you as an applicant show up and are able to present that you are qualified for the practical test. And same is true of the aircraft. Yeah, when someone shows up, it shouldn't be the first time they look through the aircraft logbooks to find the annual or ELT inspection or whatever. In fact, on my website, I actually have some on the registration forms. I actually had people fill out a registration form for the aircraft and list what those specific dates are for the airworthiness of the aircraft. And I don't really do that because I want them to show me the aircraft's airworthy before I even meet them. I really do that so that gets their hands on the logbooks and they can fill that out. Because I have spent several times on check rides, spending 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour as someone goes and finds the logbooks and then digs through the logbooks looking for those inspections. So those are really important, as well as the flight instructors doing their part and doing the appropriate endorsements and making sure their people are ready to go and that they meet all the requirements.
Yeah, I like that you've got on your website, you kind of pregame some of that stuff before the check ride happens. And a lot of us do the same thing, either through email, we'll send a scenario and we'll ask for that certain information to be ready or sent to us beforehand. But you, like I think most everybody else in Arkansas, most of the DPs that I know, you've got other obligations outside of just being a DPE. So you want to make sure that when you schedule a check ride, that check ride at least is able to happen. And so, uh, that's a big drain on our resources, and specifically time resources. If you schedule a check ride, show up and the airplane's not airworthy, that's always very frustrating. And I think everybody has had that happen.
Well, and not only is it frustrating for us and our time, but if someone shows up for a practical test and they're not ready, then you just taken a date from maybe someone that was. We're all super busy, and our schedules are busy, and DPs are booking months in advance. But when you cancel at the last minute or are not prepared to the practical test via you as a person or the aircraft, then you just took a date that someone who was prepared could use. And so that's pretty frustrating, and that hurts the whole system.
Yeah. Now, I will say also that applicants need to be looking at the airworthiness of the aircraft well beforehand, before the check ride, because if you're looking at it a couple days prior and you notice an airworthiness item or an inspection's missing, it's going to take you probably a significant amount of time to get that scheduled in with a mechanic and get it fixed. So really, you need to be looking at this a few weeks in advance to make sure, because I'm sure you've had that happen before, where somebody calls the week of the check ride and says, "Hey, this inspection's out of date, and the earliest I can get in is 2 weeks from now, so I'm going to have to push that date back." And normally we're able to flex with that. I don't know about you. I keep a waiting list kind of ready to go, so it's better than finding out the day of, for sure. But it still can cause a domino effect in our schedule, depending on the check ride.
Right. Yeah, I'm the same way. I've had it both ways. I've had the day of, and that stops the check ride, and I've had it again a week out, and again that lets me go ahead and maybe get someone else in that position, or at least it gives the person time. But but hopefully our CFIs out there are teaching airworthiness requirements of the aircraft to the appropriate level, and every time they go and fly with an applicant or their student in the aircraft, they're making sure that they're flying airworthy aircraft. And so hopefully that's not a surprise the week of the aircraft. That's not the time we should really be looking at that. We should be considering that on every single time, every single flight, we should be considering that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in regards to endorsements, I've been asking all the other examiners this question, because I've noticed, anecdotally, I think, just an increase in the number of missing endorsements that I've been seeing over the past year. Have you been experiencing anything like that?
I really haven't here lately. I think maybe because I have a lot of the same instructors, and then I get to do quite a bit of type ratings, and they just don't require as many endorsements. So I haven't seen a big change here lately, just in what I've been doing.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I forgot you do a lot of type ratings in the Metroliner and maybe another helicopter too.
I do type ratings in the Fairchild Metroliner and the King Air 300 and 350s.
Okay, very nice. So, I mean, that's something we haven't talked about. That's kind of interesting. Uh, I, I think the only authorization I have for type rating on my certificate is the LM100J C-130, which I haven't gotten to do one of those yet. So, is there anything different on a type ride that you're seeing?
Um, yeah, a little bit of people not being prepared for the avionics that the aircraft have. I'll get people who can fly the airplane just fine, but there'll be a GPS of some sort. Maybe it's a really old GPS. A lot of the Metroliners that I fly have the old KLN 90B, and I'll have people go, I don't know how to work that thing. Or sometimes it's stuff that's a little bit more advanced, maybe Proline 21 or Proline Fusion, and I'll have a pilot go, yeah, I can fly this airplane fine, but I can't run that GPS. I'm like, hey, this is what you brought to the dance. So we need to make sure that we meet all the requirements of the ACS, and you have to do it in the aircraft that you brought, and you have to know how to work all the equipment in the aircraft. So that's generally a lot of the problems I see is just operating the navigation systems or FMS systems in those aircraft.
Yeah, and from an ACS standpoint, you're using the ATP ACS for both the type ride and, I guess, do you ever combine an initial type rating ride with an ATP initial as well? Is that something you can do together?
It is. They're really basically the same. The flight is exactly the same. The oral portion or ground portion for the ATP is longer, but it does contain the requirements for the type rating, which are operation of systems and performance and limitation. So, yeah, I've had a couple times I've conducted an ATP check ride along with a type rating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not something I've talked about on the channel a lot. I've done a lot of ATP check rides, but those are typically in light twins. So unlike you doing them in a kind of a commuter category, I guess is where the Metroliner and 350 would fall. But still, that's interesting. A lot of people listening to this might be on their way to go to an airline, and the next checker that they take will be under those ATP airman certification standards at ACS. So yeah, if you look in the ACS for ATP, it does cover, the systems section is rather lengthy, the amount of knowledge topics that are in there.
Sure. Yeah.
So I could definitely see that being a limitation.
Hey, Seth, if you don't mind, something I wanted to back up and say just a little bit when we talked about, communicating with people getting prepared for a practical test is, again, we all do it differently. Again, I work just via phone, email, and text. A problem I do see a lot of is I'll have someone contact me, normally via text. That's probably what I get most of the time. And I'll just get a text that'll go, "Can you do my check ride?" And I respond with, "Who are you? Where are you? What type of aircraft are you going to use? And maybe who's your instructor?" They'll normally answer that question. And then, even if I can't get to them right away, I may tell them, "Hey, I'm busy right now. I don't have anything for the next, month or so. Text me back or get back with me in, a certain amount of time." And then, I don't keep all the text that I get on my phone. And so I'll get another text, maybe the same person a month out. "Hey, you said to get back with you. Will you do my check ride? Who are you? Where are you? And, what type of aircraft are you?" So I would ask, that, and I don't know if you guys deal with the same thing, if you're going to text with a VPE or maybe even email, try to provide as much information that you can. And even if it's been a month since you've communicated with that same DPE, me especially, please give me a little bit of background because, this is a very, very busy time for us. I think we all as DPs get 5 phone calls, 5 texts, 5 emails every single day. And I just don't have the capacity to save all that stuff certainly not in my brain. And I don't save it all on my phone because I just can't keep it organized. So maybe if it's been a little while since you've talked to a specific DPE, kind of start over again as you introduce yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I hate it. I wish there was a cleaner way for us to communicate because I get messages, I've got kind of a bigger online presence, so I'll even get messages, requests for check rides through Instagram, through Facebook, email, phone number, text. And just imagine, put yourself in our shoes, if you would. You've got your regular communication from like family members and work because we all have outside work that we do. So there's that normal day-to-day communication happening, plus an additional, like you said, probably 5 people a day reaching out requests. So we're just one person. I don't hire any anybody to manage my messaging or contacts. So it can get really busy, and a lot of people's requests can just get lost kind of in that confusion there. So be persistent and just realize that, we might have missed your message. And I don't know about you, but you're not really going to offend me if you send me multiple texts with details requesting it. Kind of that actually helps me out versus just send one text or a voicemail or message and then kind of give up. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, the people that are most persistent are the ones that I'm normally able to get with quicker. Also, if I get 5 texts in a day and one of them says, "Will you do my check ride?" and the other one says, "Hey, this is Joe so-and-so. I'm at this airport, this type of aircraft. I need a private pilot practical exam." Which one of those two am I going to answer first? The one that gives me the most information.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that's a good discussion on admin stuff. So then moving into the oral. So we've gotten past the admin. You've started the test. Given your initial briefing and started the oral exam. What are you seeing out there in the oral exam phase of the check ride?
One thing that's consistently a problem that I see is, again, kind of back to airworthiness. I think that too many people are leaning on the acronym Aviate, and that's normally one of my first questions is, hey, of course, we've already looked through the logbooks because we have to make sure the aircraft's airworthy before we even start the practical test. But one of my questions is, hey, if you look through these logbooks or even show me in these logbooks that this aircraft is airworthy, and people spout off Aviate, and when they get through the annual inspection, they bring up the VOR inspection. I'm like, okay, for us to go do this day VFR flight, do we need a VOR inspection? And so there just seems to be some misunderstanding there that not all those inspections are required for maybe the flight that you're doing today. So a little bit more depth of knowledge in airworthiness. And the other one, I see people going down this same rabbit hole, is the altimeter inspection. So again, day VFR, private pilot practical test, or possibly a commercial practical test. And you're going to do a flight in this aircraft, maybe a commercial flight providing pilot services. You look to the logbook, and the altimeter inspection was done 36 months ago. Can you still do this day and night VFR flight? And a lot of times, too many times, I get the answer of, well, no, I can't. Well, the altimeter inspection is only required for IFR. It's not required for VFR. Sometimes people kind of go down the wrong rabbit hole, and they'll go, well, 91205 says I'm required to have an altimeter. Well, that's true, but having an altimeter and the aircraft having an altimeter inspection are two separate things. So that's a very, very common thing. In fact, I really wish the FAA would relabel and that the altimeter inspection and call it a pedostatic inspection, not necessarily an altimeter inspection, because that just leads people down that wrong road. So that's really that's kind of a big one. Just knowing that all of those inspections aren't required, knowing the duration of them, also ADs. How can you show me that, and how would you check that all the ADs have been complied with? And really the only saying checking the logbook, or just even an AD compliance sheet that could be 11 and a half months old, that's not a satisfactory answer. You need to make sure that that there are places to go and look those up, and that's a continuous kind of commitment of a pilot to do that, and you're responsible to make sure that all the ADs have been complied with if you're going to go fly that aircraft.
Yeah, I think everybody's brought up ADs, and what I'm looking for when ADs, I'm first of all, I'm looking for that AD compliance sheet, and then what I really like to see is the applicant at a bare minimum know the reoccurring ADs. So how many reoccurring ADs and when their next due date is. They don't have to have that memorized, of course, but at least tell me or be able to show me when the next due date is for those reoccurring ADs. There's some older, a lot of ADs, and you're an AMP, correct? Mm-hmm. So yeah, from an A&P standpoint, there's a lot of those ADs that were maybe complied with, on some of these training aircraft before me or the applicant was born. These ADs were complied with a long time ago. So you don't have to have those memorized, of course, but those need to be documented somewhere. And normally that's done on a AD compliance sheet in a standard format, But what's really important is those reoccurring ADs, because a lot of times I've had to cancel a check ride before where an aircraft owner who's not doing a 100-hour inspection because it's not required has been flying that airplane for 100 hours or 300 hours for that year, thinking that, oh, I'm good to go. I don't need a 100-hour because this isn't for hire. But they've overlooked the fact that they have 2 or 3 ADs that have a 100-hour interval. And since they weren't doing 100-hour inspections, that got missed. And so all the way to the check ride, and it's like, hey, you've got 3 ADs here that aren't complied with now because they're 100-hour reoccurring inspections. So that's an example of how that could affect the check ride legality.
Yeah. The other thing that comes up a lot, again, kind of part of airworthiness, when it comes to instrument practical test and kind of back to the VOR inspection, I'll ask an applicant, what method, they're using to do a VOR check on their aircraft. And, or I may just give the example, okay, the aircraft are going to fly today. You look through the documents and a VOR check has not been done the last 30 days. How would you do it? And, I kind of get the standard answer of, well, I could do a ground check or I could do an air check. And if it's a ground, it's plus or minus 4 degrees. If it's the airborne check, it's plus or minus 6 degrees. And that's where they stop. And I'll go, okay, so the aircraft we're flying today needs a VOR check. Talk me through it. Tell me exactly how you would do it. And I've had a lot of people who just, they can't do that. They can tell you it needs to be done and they can give you the standard, but just the exact process of how they would do it seems to be getting missed somewhere in the teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a couple of things you've said today that kind of tie it back into those fundamentals of instruction that our CFIs should be doing, is that building the knowledge levels. I see, and I'm sure you see that too, but the example that you used earlier of the AVIATE acronym or the 8 tomato flames, that's a great example of rote memory. It's pretty easy to get an applicant to memorize what the acronym AVIATE stands for and what 8 tomato flames stands for. But remember, we want to get to the correlation level of knowledge. And that's a lot more than just memorizing an acronym. That's knowing how to implement it, knowing how it affects other parts of the aircraft systems and your safety and risk management and all that. And so I think a lot of times it's CFIs just maybe not quite getting the knowledge to the level it needs to be and ending at that rote level. And I see the same thing when I'm giving check rides.
Right.
Well, so on the, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the ATP or the type rating, because both the type rating and the ATP, both of those check grades, those can actually be split up into 2 separate days. Is that correct?
They can. I don't think I personally had that happen, but yeah, they can. You basically go in and do the ground portion first, and then you can go in and sign off the 8710 that ground portion has been complete, and then the flight portion kind of comes as almost like a separate test. But I personally have not had them spread out over 2 days, maybe unless there was a weather issue. It's normally something that I get done in a day.
Yeah. At the airline I fly at, we actually did them almost a month apart. Your ground eval is done for your initial type rating, and then several days, if not weeks later, you take your practical test, usually in the simulator at that point, and it's actually 2 different check airmen or 2 different designees that are doing that test. So I just wanted to point that out, that the tests you're given, they actually can be planned to be split up across separate days.
They can be, yeah. Yep. I'm sure everyone else has probably said this also, but again, when we talk airworthiness, inoperative equipment just seems to be one of the huge things that are misunderstood. And you've already brought up the wonderful acronym 8 tomato flames, which You'll probably find out most DPs hate that acronym because it's certainly not all inclusive of everything that's required to make sure that the aircraft can operate with inoperative equipment. And I try to explain it this way, that inoperative equipment is not 91205, which is your day VFR equipment you have to have operational on the aircraft. Inoperative equipment is 91213. And the way I like to explain it is, if you have something inoperative on the aircraft, number one, this happens on the ground. Or probably happens on the ground, or at least for this process, happens on the ground. Use the FARs. You don't have to have this memorized. If this happens on the ground, you probably have ForeFlight or some other application that you're using. You probably have the FARs downloaded on there. And just know to go to 91213 and use it like a checklist. That just seems to be a big, big misunderstanding. And another place I'm seeing that a lot right now in understanding how to go through the procedure for inoperative equipment is, there's a school here in Central Arkansas that's using TechNows, and the TechNam has a kinds of operation equipment list. One piece of equipment required on that KOEL is a first aid kit. So I'll kind of give the scenario of, hey, you see the first aid kit has been taken out of this aircraft. Can we still go fly? And if you go straight to tomato flames, you're going down the wrong road. But if you know your aircraft has a kinds of operation equipment list, and you go to it and you look at it, day, night, VFR, IFR, the TechNams require a first aid kit, along with all other kind of, I'll say, strange things, but that's really a big process that is just very, very misunderstood. And unfortunately, I see a lot of notice of disapproval for inoperative equipment. And I probably also come up with some of the other DPs. Don't think that you're just going to get lucky and, gee, maybe Jeremy won't ask me about inoperative equipment. When you go to the ACS and you understand the ACS framework and how it works, you know that it is something that we must ask, and it's a skill, and you have to pass that skill. So you're going to get it on every check ride. So don't hope you're going to get lucky and not get a question on inoperative equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's another flight school here in Arkansas that has they use MALs. And the MXT7 MAL has also a required equipment list, and one of the requirements is the baggage strap in the cargo compartment is on that list. And so that's kind of the one that I get, that I bring up. And believe it or not, once you ask this in a couple of check rides and realize, make it known to people, suddenly all the instructors are teaching it. It's amazing how that works. When you start evaluating it, they start teaching it. So
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So moving on from the oral into the flight, let's talk about some flight maneuvers. What are you seeing out there as far as maneuvers go?
Just kind of starting with the private pilot practical test. On the pilotage and dead reckoning, the navigation portion, not utilizing their clock and understanding that there's your requirement to get to your first waypoint, within a time frame. And that's something that as a pilot, that you need to be tracking. And I'm all about ForeFlight, and I'm all about using electronic flight bags when we can, but we have to make sure that you understand these requirements and can meet these requirements. And that's one of them. So just using your little airplane moving across your ForeFlight magenta line isn't going to meet the requirement of the ACS. So that's kind of the first thing that I see. I don't want to say unfortunately, because I learned to fly at the North Little Rock Airport as a teenager, but I see airspace issues at North Little Rock. Sorry, it just is what it is. If you're coming to North Little Rock and taking a practical test with me, then you should know about airspace, and it shouldn't really be a big deal. But we have the restricted area to the northwest of us. I've had several times I've had to stop people from going into the restricted area. And the thing about that restricted area is most of the time it's not active. In fact, when I go fly my own airplane, that's where I go. I go right in the middle of the restricted area, right over the top of the drop zone. I make sure it's not active, But it's a great place to go fly because there's the drop zone down there with a nice, runway. If something went wrong, I'm really close to North Little Rock. It's a great, and nobody goes in there because they think it's restricted. It's a great place to fly. So I've had to stop people from going in there a couple times. Had to stop applicants from climbing into Little Rock's Class Charlie, and understand that there are different shelves of the Class Charlie that start at a different altitude. So that's something. So I deal with that quite a bit. The other thing I would say, at least on privates, is for the stall, the power on stall, power off stall. Understand that they must be done to the full stall and not just the first indication. And I'll even get phone calls. I'll get phone calls from instructors, and they'll go, "Hey, Jeremy, on so-and-so's private check ride, do you expect to see full stall or first indication?" And I tell them, it's not up to me. That's written specifically in the ACS, and that practical test requires the maneuvers be done to the full stall. Probably the biggest maneuver I see issues with on the commercial single engine land, and probably the biggest maneuver I see on the CFI initial, is 8s on pylon. It's required on both of those practical tests, and the issue that I see is not necessarily not understanding the maneuver, and not necessarily not knowing how to figure pivotal altitude. Everyone seems to know that math pretty good, or at least they have have written it down, or a chart or whatever. But there seems to be a misconception out there that they are not allowed, that applicant is not allowed to make power changes during the maneuver. And it depends on the day. If there's no wind that day, well, the maneuver is probably going to be pretty easy, and not having to make power changes is not going to be a big deal. But on really, really windy days, when your pivotal altitude is changing quite a bit because your ground speed is changing, that if the point tends to move forward on of your aircraft, or you see you need to descend because pivotal altitude is lower, and you start a descent, but you don't pull the power back or don't reduce the power at all, and your airspeed goes up 20 knots, well, guess what your ground speed just did? It just went up 20 knots. And so now where's pivotal altitude? Well, now it's up above you. So everybody then, pulls back on the yoke and they climb. Well, now they're going to get 20 knots slower. Well, where's pivotal altitude now? Well, now it's down below you. And during the debriefs, when we talk about this, I hear a lot, well, my instructor said I can't touch the power during this maneuver. And I say the same thing to the instructor, or if it's a CFI initial check ride. Where are you getting that from? Please show me in the ACS, in the airplane flying handbook, and the pilot's handbook for aeronautical knowledge. Show me somewhere that's written. And nobody can show me that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed the same thing. I've even noticed, people confusing the 8s on pylons with the turns around a point, and maybe convoluting or trying to combine those in a weird way. There's just a lot of confusion, I think, around that maneuver. My personal one that kind of irritates me is when they start 8s on pylons without having both pylons identified. They only identify one pylon, and then we're halfway through the turn and they're like, there's my second pylon. And it's like a tree, and we're in the forest, and I can't see what that pylon is. So I realize maybe there's times where that maybe could happen and you could still pass, because the ACS isn't crystal clear that you have to have both pylons, but definitely selecting pylons is one of the skills that you have to do. So I think you should have both of those picked out. They're relatively easy to find if you practice it a few times, but that's definitely a maneuver that I see a lot of, and see the same thing you mentioned, which is basically a pilot-induced oscillation where we're just rapidly changing altitude the whole time we're doing the 8s on pylons. It feels like we're on some sort of roller coaster. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I've had CFI applicants fly me around for 20 minutes trying to pick two pylons. And I may put a little bit of pressure on them. I'll go, look, if I was your student right now and I was paying for this aircraft and I was paying you for flight instruction and you're flying me around for 20 minutes because you can't pick out 2 pylons, I'm like, I'd be pretty mad at you right now. This is all on my dime. I don't harp on commercial students quite as much in their pylon picking. I can normally figure out what they're talking about, but for a CFI, I make sure that they are very specific in the pylons they pick, because if I'm your student and I don't know exactly what pylons you're using or what points you're using as pylons, this maneuver will never make sense to me. So
Right.
just like you're saying, that one tree or that pond, when there's 3 ponds there, can pick them out before you start the maneuver. Make sure that your student knows exactly what the pylons are, and then do the maneuver.
Now I want to circle back to stalls because you mentioned the stalls, and I've noticed it seems like to me that, especially at the private level, I see a lot of private pilot applicants that you can tell they basically have a vibe about them when they're doing the stall, that they're uncomfortable with stalls, and what that tells me is maybe they're not being exposed to them appropriately during training, and maybe their CFIs aren't comfortable with them either. But I feel like the full stall maneuver, especially the power on full stall maneuver at the private pilot level, they're not comfortable with that at all. And especially if you ask them to do it in a turn, there's a lot of people that haven't done turning stalls. And to me, that's kind of concerning, because it's like, well, that's a lot of times where a stall spin accident is going to occur is when you're slow and you're maneuvering, so you're in some sort of bank angle. So have you experienced that as well?
Not as much uncomfort with them. When I first started, and I think at least with a lot of the schools that I do, I think I've kind of made my point with this. I initially started to see see a few secondary stalls, because applicants were trying not to lose any altitude during the stalls. And after a few notice disapproval from secondary stalls, I would go to their instructor and go, hey, how are you teaching people to recover from a stall? If a stall happens because we've exceeded the critical aim of attack, all we need to do is reduce the angle of attack to get out of the stall, and that means lowering the nose, and that can mean descending. So I had a lot of instructors who in their mind thought that there was a maximum altitude that could be lost during stalls, and there used to be. I know when I was learning to fly, there was a maximum altitude you could lose during stalls, but that's gone, and it was purposely taken out of the ACS and hopefully purposely taken out of training, because we want people to reduce the angle of attack, not just try to power out of the stall and not lose any altitude. So that was a problem that I used to see a lot. I don't see so much anymore. The other thing that I was seeing a lot of was, especially on the power on stall, applicants starting the maneuver from too high of an airspeed and then adding full power and just pulling back till the airplane stalled. And one of the requirements of that maneuver is that we maintain our heading plus or minus 10 degrees. And, when you start that maneuver in a Cessna 172 from 110 knots and you apply full power and start pulling back, I don't care who you are. You're probably not going to be able to maintain the heading plus or minus 10 degrees when the airplane stalls and it's, 60 degrees nose up. So,
Yeah.
you're just talking to flight instructors and going, hey, how are you teaching this maneuver, and why are you teaching it this way? And this is an answer I get a lot from flight instructors, and, well, that's the way I was taught. Okay, well, what does the ACS say? What's our requirement? So, the ACS does kind of give the option to the DPE, that you'll let the applicant know what power setting that you want them to use. And I'm a little bit of a Santa Claus on that. I'll normally just ask the applicant, hey, for power on stalls, what power setting have you and your flight instructor been using? And if they say full power, I say, knock yourself out, let's see it. If they say, well, we use 65% power, which in this airplane is 2,000 RPM, I go, that sounds great. Let's do it that way. So I don't see that one so much anymore, but that was one I saw a lot, was way too much power, way too high of a pitch attitude because they were starting maneuver at too high of an airspeed if they're going to use full power. But I don't see that so much anymore. I think I've gotten a few folks' minds change on that.
Yeah, and that's good. One last thing I'd like to point out here is on the private, we're taking it to a full stall, which also brings up the problem of we could potentially be conditioning students to ignore stall indications because they're constantly going past all those stall indications to get it to a full stall, and stall indications being like a buffet or stall warning horn. So I've got the ACS pulled up here. So in the private pilot, both power on and power off, in the skills section, you'll see a skill that says acknowledge cues of the impending stall and then recover promptly after full stall occurs. So that acknowledgement, that's something that I see a lot of applicants fail to do, is acknowledge. So that means as you're setting up for this and you hear the stall horn going off, just simply say, hey, that's the stall horn, acknowledged. Something like that to let us know, hey, you at least acknowledge that, because really it's kind of odd thing to evaluate as a day-to-day flying. I want you to execute the stall recovery whenever you get the first cue of a stall. I don't want you to take it all the way to full stall. But in order for you to be a safe pilot, we also have to make sure that you can recover after you've experienced a full stall, just in case that ever occurs. So that's kind of a nuanced point, but I wanted to bring that up to make sure folks are acknowledging that and they're practicing that with their CFIs.
Yeah. Again, and we talk a bit about type ratings. So this just something that kind of came in my head there. A lot of the type ratings I give in the Fairchild Metroliner, it has what we call a SAS system, a stall avoidance system, which will induce possibly a shaker on the yoke, a stall warning horn, and eventually about 1 knot prior to the stall, it will give a 65-pound pusher, which will actually push the yoke forward to help recover from the stall. And you mentioned again about the private pilot exam kind of being the only one requiring full stall. I like to talk to folks about on those type ratings that recover at the first indication. And I kind of mentioned to them, look, I don't care what that first indication is. It doesn't have to be in that airplane. Doesn't have to be the shaker. Doesn't have to be the horn. Please don't make it the pusher, because I want them to understand that's a calibrated system. And especially a lot of the Metroliners I give check rides in, they're freighters and they've been flown a long time. They've been flown pretty hard. And I bet it's been a long time since that system has been calibrated. So don't just trust that stall avoidance system. And this is probably even true in your Cessna 172 or your Cherokee or whatever. Understand there could be errors in there, and thinking of what other cues of a stall might be. Don't just rely on your stall avoidance system or your stall warning system in your aircraft, because they might be wrong.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Great point. We've been talking a lot about private and commercial maneuvers, maybe touched on instrument a little bit, but let's kind of move over to instrument stuff. Given instrument check rides, anything you're seeing in the flight portion you'd like to talk about?
Absolutely. The probably the biggest thing I see in the flight portion for instruments is I'll give someone in their scenario, you're going to fly from here to there. And I had them file a flight plan with me. And again, if they use ForeFlight for that, I'll let them do it on ForeFlight. Just don't send it, just show it to me. And of course, they'll almost always file direct, which is fine. But understand, during your instrument practical test, whatever route you filed, I don't care if it's direct, I don't care if it's an airway, that's not the clearance I'm going to give you. I can assure you I am not. So whenever I'm acting as their ATC and they call to get they simulate their radio call to me to get their ATC clearance, I give them a different clearance than what they filed. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to make sure they understand that what requirements they're going to have to meet to operate in the IFR system. And I'll say every time I give them a different route than what they filed, but they have already put their filed route in their GPS. And the majority of the time, they take off with their filed route in their GPS. They didn't change it at all. And they just don't think about it, or they think they're going to deal with it in the air. And that's the wrong time to deal with that. So that's probably one of the biggest things I see on the instrument. It's just taking off, not having a plan to fly the route that I just gave you.
Yeah, I've had a disapproval because of that, and it really wasn't because they took off without the plan in there. I was willing to allow them to fix that in the air when they noticed the problem. The problem was when we got in the air and they realized their mistake, they went into the GPS to try to fix it, and we started getting off heading and altitude, and basically they didn't maintain basic aircraft control.
Yeah.
And so they received a disapproval for that, and it all could have been avoided, like you said, if they would have just programmed it on the ground. Another deficiency I see kind of related to that is you'll give them a new clearance, and instead of putting it in the flight plan, they'll just go direct to. And I don't think a lot of pilots understand that the direct to function in a lot of like the Garmin units, that's kind of a separate flight plan than the flight plan, portion. That's like a separate function that you're using on the GPS. And it can cause confusion because the initial flight plan is still in there, but you're just doing a direct to that's kind of separate from that. And now you've got extra lines on your moving map display, which could cause confusion. So, I think handling that on the ground, that's something that I've seen as well.
Yeah. Another thing I'll bring up, and I know we're kind of specifically talking about the flight portion, but something on the ground portion for the instrument practical test, and this is true for private and commercial also, is, one of the first questions I'm going to ask on the instrument practical test is, what privileges are you gaining by getting an instrument rating? And of course, one of the ones everyone says is, I'll be able to fly special VFR at night. And I say, great. What is special VFR, and when do you need it? And it seems kind of odd. You go, why is this guy asking about special VFR on an instrument practical test? But the biggest thing is I've seen is I don't think flight instructors are either they don't understand special VFR or they're just not teaching it with the thought process of, well, we're not going to teach you about special VFR because you shouldn't be doing that. Well, I'm not going to teach you short field landing because you don't need to go land the short field. It doesn't work that way. It's something that you have to understand. And the other thing about special VFR, if you don't understand 91-155, where it says to enter, and I'm going to paraphrase this, surface-based B, C, D, or E airspace, to operate beneath the ceiling in surface-based B, C, D, or E airspace, you must have 1,000-foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. If you don't understand that part of 91-155, then you'll never understand special VFR. Because that's when you're going to need it. Those are the airports that you're going to need that. And 91-155, as we all know, is the nice big chart there in the FARs that show us our cloud clearance and visibilities. Reference to certain airspaces. Well, everyone stops after they read that chart. Read the rest of 91-155, and you'll read the regulation that says, to operate beneath the ceiling in the surface-based B, C, D, or E airspace, it must be 1,000-foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. And again, I just paraphrased 2 paragraphs there, but you've got to understand that. And if you don't understand that, you will never understand special VFR. And you're probably still thinking, well, Jeremy, what's that got to do with an instrument check ride? Well, what it has to do with it is if you cancel IFR in the air in surface-based E airspace, because you're probably not have to do it in B or C, and it's not 1,000-foot ceiling, and it's not 3 miles visibility, or you don't have your cloud clearance, then you just violated 91-155. So understanding that, I think, is hugely important when it comes to an instrument check ride, to know when you should or should not cancel IFR in the air.
You're absolutely right. The 1,000-foot and 1,000-foot ceiling, 3 miles visibility. When I generally ask people, what are basic VFR, they start, like you said, with the chart, and they start describing VFR cloud clearance limits. When my question was, well, what is just the assumed VFR? And we get in kind of I like to talk about the flight category dots that seem to be getting used more, that I think are pretty useful. A green, blue, red, pink, dot that you see there on an application like ForeFlight. But that gets in line with what you're saying is, that surface level out of 91,155 below the chart, you actually have to understand that, not just your cloud clearance limits, to decide what is VFR.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I see a lot on instrument rating practical tests, especially in the oral, is not being able to read a TAF and make a decision on whether you need an alternate or whether an airport meets the requirements of the alternate. People can quote me the regulation perfectly, and I go, okay, great. What time did you say we're taking off today? Good. Okay, 11 o'clock. Here's a TAF. And do you need an alternate? And too many times they can't do it. Again, it's back to that application process and correlation process. They can spout off 1, 2, 3 rule all day long, but when you show them a TAF, they can't decide if they need an alternate, nor can they all too often know what constitutes a ceiling when we're talking few, scattered, broken, and overcast.
Yeah, that's a problem I've seen as well, and kind of gets back to that rote level of knowledge of just knowing the regulation and not really understanding how to apply it. That application theory, that's really what we're going for. And I don't know about you, but in a Checkride environment, if they show me that they can apply and use, good risk management for that regulation, and maybe they don't know exactly what the regulation says, I would much rather see that. I would rather them not have the regulation memorized word for word, but show me that they can apply it in a useful manner, rather than have it memorized verbatim. And then when I give them that example TAF, like you said, they don't know how to apply it correctly. So,
Well, the other thing is,
I'm with you there.
Open up the FARs and read it. Again, this happened, our IFR planning and our IFR decision making for the most part, and our IFR flight, our filing, our plan, that happens on the ground. Open up the FARs, read that while you're looking at a TAF, and make your decision. I'm really big on things that happen on the ground or things you can deal with on the ground. Open the FARs and read them. Use them like a checklist.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to weather minimums, what are you seeing applicants come prepared to the Checkride with in terms of personal minimums, specifically on the instrument rating?
Unfortunately, a lot of times I'll hear them mention circling minimums, that their personal minimums are whatever the circling minimums are at that airport. And for a private pilot that you're just getting your instrument rating, that's too low. I'm kind of more of the, when you first get your instrument rating, that you needs to be higher than that. You need to be planning on going to places where you can do a visual approach. And now when you get there, the weather's probably not going to be that good, and you're going to have to do an instrument approach. But so yeah, a lot of times I see people's personal minimums for departing being lower than what again, that's personal minimum, but not something I could give a notice of disapproval for. And I'm glad they have something, but saying that, that the circling minimums are their personal minimums for takeoff or for doing an approach, that's way too low. And I don't know how many of our brand new instrument pilots during their training really got a lot of time in actual IMC conditions and did approaches, down to minimums in IMC conditions. It's different. It's not the same as having the hood on, I can guarantee, and you know that just as well. So, bump those personal minimums up just a little bit. It can only make your check ride go better.
Yeah, and remember, we've talked about this in other episodes, but implement those personal minimums on the day of the check ride. If the day of your check ride is exceeding those personal minimums, do not, just arbitrarily say, well, I've got Jeremy with me. He's an experienced DPE. He's going to keep me safe, and decide to go fly. Because then you're showing us that those personal minimums don't really mean anything. So make sure you're abiding by those personal minimums in the check ride, the day of there.
Yeah. Well, and that doesn't mean that, especially if I've given, simulated weather and that simulated weather is below someone's personal minimums, it doesn't mean we're not going to do the check ride. When someone says, well, hey, Jeremy, I look at this weather you give me and that's below my personal minimums. In this scenario, I wouldn't go. I'm going to go, great decision, making. You know what? The weather just went up and it just went up to your personal minimums or above. And now let's go to the check ride. Now, it may not be that way when you really ride the approach, but if you're making good decisions like that, those aren't things that are going to stop the check ride. That's what we want to hear is, hey, I wouldn't do this or I wouldn't go. Okay, well, we'll make it where we can.
And another thing you brought up, anyway, what it reminded me of is when you're learning on as an instrument pilot about icing. I see a lot of CFIs basically teaching how to avoid icing and don't fly into icing conditions at all. And I just want you to remember as an instrument pilot that is a aircraft limitation. That's not a pilot limitation. So you as a pilot, you actually do need to know some of the basics of how to fly in icing conditions safely should you be in an aircraft that's equipped to fly in icing conditions. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of instructors are forgoing that training because they're saying, well, you're never going to fly in icing conditions anyway, so I'm not going to teach you how to fly in icing conditions. And that's not really the case. You probably, if you're a professional pilot long enough, you will fly an aircraft that can fly in icing conditions. And sure, when you're learning how to fly a plane like a Metroliner or a King Air 350, that includes some training on how to use those de-ice and anti-ice systems that those aircraft are equipped with. But still, I think we should be learning a little bit of it as instrument students and not just going the route of, okay, I'm never going to fly in icing. Just know that that's an aircraft limitation, not a pilot limitation.
Well, and again, back to here in Central Arkansas, we have a school using a Diamond DA, I don't know if it's a DA-40, DA-42. That aircraft is certified to be flown in icing conditions, and it has anti-ice and de-ice systems. I've had several applicants for instrument ratings or just even the multi-engine commercial ratings in that aircraft, and I started asking questions about the de-ice equipment, and they go, oh, no, we don't use that, or I'm not planning on using that. I'm like, this is the plane you brought to the dance, man, and it has that equipment, and you have to be able to talk about it. So don't think just because you're not planning on using it, if the aircraft has it, we're going to talk about it for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked admin, we've talked ground oral exam, we've talked about some flight portion maneuvers and decision making there. So I thought we've had a really good discussion. Any last minute thing you'd like to add?
The biggest thing that I see is a lot of times with CFIs, and I'll even have CFIs ask me, hey, Jeremy, I have this person that they think they're ready for their practical test, and I don't think they're ready. What should I do? I put a lot back on CFIs, and as a CFI, if you have an applicant that is not ready, don't recommend them, no matter how much they pressure you or their parents pressure you or whatever it is. If they're not ready, do not send them for the practical test. And for applicants, again, especially for private, it's really hard because you don't know what you don't know. If you don't feel ready, if there's uncertainty, don't take the practical test. The worst thing we do as pilot examiners is issue notice disapprovals. It's hard. I hate doing that. I would much rather see a perfectly flown check ride, super easy to evaluate, than the one that's right on the line. That's the hardest one. But they have to issue a notice disapproval. So, make sure you're ready. Be sure you pick a good CFI, and if you are a CFI, make sure your applicant is ready. And I've had lots of CFIs say to me, yeah, Jeremy, I just couldn't get this young lady to study. She, I told her, and she wouldn't study. I'm like, look here, look at this endorsement. You are the one that wrote that you certified this person is prepared for the practical test. So you are the one that sent them for the practical test. So just make sure you're ready. And I know everyone's busy and DPs are busy and you want to get your check ride done, but get it done right. Get it done and get it done right the first time. even if that means, for a private pilot, 40 hours. Well, everybody talked about 40 hours. That's the minimum. You can do more than that. Make sure you're ready. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. Not really wasting our time as pilot examiners. That's what we're there to do. But be sure that you're ready and get it done right the first time.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Jeremy, it was great talking with you. Maybe I'd love to have you back on because you fly some exotic aircraft. You fly the B-29 still, right?
I do, yes, sir. Yeah, I'm very, very fortunate to get to do that.
That's just awesome. Now, have you given are you a flight examiner now with the Commemorative Air Force? Can you give a check ride in the B-29?
I cannot yet, so to speak. That's something I'm working on. So I'm actually assigned to the Specialty Aircraft Examiner branch. I'm not managed by the Little Rock FSDO. I was moved to the Specialty Aircraft Examiner branch with the goal of being able to add authorizations to conduct practical tests in the B-29 and the B-24. So it's not a very fast process, I can tell you that, but that's my goal, and that's something I'm working towards.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just recently added single engine C to my authorization, and that took about 6 months just for single engine C, which is very pedestrian compared to B-29, I'm sure. So good luck with that process. And I got to have you back on just to see how a B-29 check ride would go. That's pretty awesome. So.
Sure. Well, thank you, Seth. Thanks for having me. And man, I would love to come back anytime. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right. Take care.